A recent post from OpenAI's Sam Altman got me thinking about how to explain better how subtext works in comparison to everything else. Because when most people read something like this, that movies are going to become video games and video games are going to become something imaginably better, they automatically think something as awful as this from Casablanca, or maybe this from Days of Heaven. And the reason why it's so funny is because one of the reasons why we go to movies is because they present something to us that we can't get in our real life, which is a story. And a story is much more than just a series of events that you can either press X on or press Y on. There's actually something greater being told, some sort of greater meaning that the author is trying to convey. And that has everything to do with the story form. Okay, now this is likely going to be a video that I do a lot of different times and keep repeating myself over and over again because it's something that I've tried to do for about 14 years now. Way back in 2010, I tried to get on Done Deal Pro and tell everybody, hey, look, this is a really cool way of looking at narrative theory where it's very objective and there's actually something going on underneath. And you can actually model the subtext that runs underneath the story. It's not just something that is out of nowhere, some magical thing that only a few people can see or understand. There's actually a meaning underneath. There's a code to it that you can use as a reference point when you write your story. So I tried, that didn't work. So then I split off, made my own company, and eventually built Subtext. And it's been quite difficult to get it across because a lot of people who are in charge don't really understand how stories work. If it was hard enough to try and convince studio executives that there's some greater meaning running underneath the story, you can only imagine how difficult it is to convey that same information to VCs or even harder, writers and storytellers. So this is my attempt to show you why something like this from Casablanca, why it's so funny, by showing you the story form of Casablanca. So let me show you. All right, here we are. This is the story form from Casablanca. In Subtext, you'll see the main character here, Rick, and then you'll see his obstacle characters, Ilsa and then Captain Renault. So Louis is there for essentially the first act until she shows up and then she takes over. But they're both hitting on the same point. So this argument between these two elements here, considering something, or in Rick's case, being inconsiderate, and then the other side of the coin, which is reneging on an agreement with someone, is exactly what gives Casablanca its meaning. So that end choice, when he makes that decision of whether or not to shoot Colonel Strausser, he's doing it because he's dropping this, where he's not thinking of anybody else but himself, and instead reneging on any kind of agreements he's had because he's a good person. So that's why everybody makes fun of that one clip. Actually made me laugh out loud because it is so ridiculous to think, well, how is a video game going to be able to model this? Because what is he? If you don't shoot him, then do you become friends with him? And then that totally changes the story's meaning. Absolutely. There is a way that knowing what the subtext of Casablanca is underneath and knowing what happens in each and every act, which is exactly what is happening here in this arrangement of 4 through lines, you could conceivably, depending on different choices made, keep the meaning of the story concrete, keep it intact, and just redo a lot of the storytelling. Because the storytelling is what sits on top, right? You have the subtext underneath, and that's where all the meaning is. And then the storytelling can be something completely different. Different stories can have the same subtext, but then have different storytelling on top. All that to say, the reason why that Casablanca thing is so funny is because he's dropping this I stick my neck out for no one sort of thing and moving into a place where he's actually going to start reconsidering. Unless OpenAI is somehow modeling this narrative structure, which is a very objective narrative structure. If they're not making the mistake of just modeling off of Hero's Journey, Save the Cat, or any of those more storytelling frameworks, then it could possibly work. But if they just think a movie is just a series of events like a video game without some greater meaning underneath it, then they're going to run into trouble. And that's why a lot of people in the comments were saying, like, no, thank you. I like movies just the way they are. I agree. The point of this video is just to show why that is so funny and why people have such a reaction to it, and to hopefully get in the heads of some people who are behind this kind of thing to understand that there is something very special going on with a story that currently isn't modeled to the best ability that it possibly could be. One of the purposes of story is to make sense of our lives. So Casablanca here is making an argument that if if you drop what it is that you're doing and you make the right choice, and instead of just thinking about yourself, you constantly renegotiate based on what's best for everybody. And that is going to bring you success and actually resolve a lot of the personal issues that you were having. That's the argument of the story. So this is a framework for the argument of the narrative. And it's a really important thing to have if you don't have this from the very beginning of any kind of narrative, whether it's a novel or a play or a television series. If you don't have any indication of this sort of thing, that there's some sort of narrative that you're putting out into the world, some sort of approach to the world that you're either arguing for or arguing against as an author, that's when people check out. And that's a problem with a lot of the movies lately. It's also probably why they think AI can do a better job, because it's not going to be any different than what's already out there. Because if people don't start really understanding the meaning of what it is that they're trying to communicate, and they don't have a framework like what's in Subtext, they're just going to continue to produce meaningless drivel that we're all going to check out on. Nobody's going to make any money. And then we're all going to be subjected to AI-infused stories, which is funny because I built Subtext and it has a tremendous amount of AI, to the point of possibly turning off some people who think, oh my gosh, how could you possibly do that? But I'm not modeling any of the storytelling. I think the applications that go in and write the entire thing as if that would be the final thing that you would read, not only is it kind of gross, it doesn't work, for one thing. There will probably be eventually a time when the models are as good as they are, and the storytelling, you won't be able to tell the difference. It'll be really elevated. But unless they're able to have underneath a narrative structure, some sort of framework that has some meaning behind it, beyond just hero's journey, which is essentially meaningless, then you're going to have to up the level of your game, because you're going to be competing with something that always has some sort of meaning in it. And so I actually think it's a good thing, because it's going to force people to really become better storytellers. And it's my hope that in some small shape or form, that Subtext can help make that a smoother transition for everybody. All right, so that's it for this one. I just wanted to go over quickly the meaning of the Storyform, how it frames and is a framework for the subtext of a story, and how important that is, and why thinking that just having different paths for a video game isn't necessarily going to be what people want if you destroy the meaning behind the actual story. And also a call for people to please write more meaningful stories. And like I said, this will be something that I will visit over and over again, and we'll probably have different ways of explaining it. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch this. And if you have any questions, as always, down below. Otherwise, I will see you next time.